The desert doesn't forgive weakness. It swallows the lost, buries the abandoned, and turns mercy into dust beneath an unforgiving sun. When shame becomes survival's enemy, even family becomes executioner. But sometimes, in the vast emptiness where the world believes nothing good can grow, a stranger's word carries more weight than blood. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The sun had barely cracked the horizon when they pushed her beyond the canyon's edge. No ceremony, no final words. Just hands, rough, familiar hands that had once braided her hair and taught her to weave, now shoving her forward into the thorned wilderness with nothing but the clothes on her back and the life growing inside her. Kiona. Whitehorse stumbled on the loose shale, her palms scraping against sun-scorched rock as she caught herself. 8 months heavy with a child, every movement was a negotiation between balance and collapse. The heat hadn't yet peaked, but already the air shimmered with it, distorting the landscape into wavering mirages. She turned back once, just once, to see the silhouettes of her people standing along the ridge. Her mother was among them. Kiona could tell by the slump of her shoulders, the way she leaned slightly to the left from an old injury. But her mother didn't step forward, didn't speak. The council elder raised his staff. The message was clear. "You are dead to us." Kiona's throat closed around words that would never matter. She turned away, feet dragging through sand and brittlebush, and walked toward nothing. The Apache don't cast out their own lightly. Dishonor had to be absolute, the shame too deep to cleanse. She had committed the unthinkable, laid with a man outside marriage, a drifter who'd passed through their winter camp with silver tongue and empty promises. He'd vanished before the first snow melted. She'd been foolish, young, hopeful in a way that now seemed like a sickness, but the child was real. The child was coming. And now she was alone. Her feet carried her south by instinct, toward the flatter basin where water sometimes pooled after storms. There had been rain 3 days prior, maybe enough to keep her alive, maybe. The sun climbed higher, pressing down on her skull like a burning hand. Sweat soaked through her deerskin tunic, sticking it to her swollen belly. Each step sent jolts of pain through her lower back. The baby kicked, restless and insistent. She pressed a hand there, murmuring useless comfort. "Not yet, please, not yet." By midday her tongue had swollen. Her lips cracked and bled. The landscape became a furnace, the rocks radiating stored heat in waves that made breathing feel like swallowing coals. She found no water, no shade deep enough to matter. Twice she collapsed and had to claw her way back to standing, using a Joshua tree's spiny trunk for leverage. Blood smeared the bark where her hands gripped too hard. The contractions started just after the sun reached its peak. At first, she thought it was dehydration, cramps that twisted her insides and made her double over, gasping. But then they came again, and again, regular, tightening. She sank to her knees in the red dirt, panting through clenched teeth as her body betrayed her in the worst possible moment. Not here, not like this. She tried to stand, tried to keep moving, but the next contraction drove her flat onto her side, vision whiting out at the edges. Time became meaningless. She existed only in the spaces between pain, brief, gasping moments where she could think clearly enough to know she was dying. The baby was coming too early, too fast, and she had no water, no help, no shelter. Vultures began to circle overhead, their shadows crossing her face in lazy, patient loops. She watched them through half-closed eyes, too exhausted to feel fear. Just tired, so desperately tired, she must have passed out. When she woke, the sun had shifted west, casting long shadows across the basin. Her body felt distant, disconnected. The contractions had slowed but not stopped. She tried to move and couldn't. Her legs wouldn't respond. Panic fluttered weakly in her chest, but even that felt muted, as if her mind had already begun the process of letting go. A sound cut through the haze, hoofbeats, distant but growing closer. Kiona's eyes struggled to focus. Through the heat shimmer, a shape materialized. A rider moving at a steady lope across the hardpan. She tried to call out, but her voice came as a broken rasp, barely louder than the wind. The rider was heading east, perpendicular to her position. He would pass by. He wouldn't see her lying in the shadow of the rocks. She dragged her arm up, waving it feebly. Nothing. He kept riding. Desperation clawed up through the exhaustion. She grabbed a fist-sized stone and hurled it toward the open ground between them. It landed with a dull thud, kicking up a small puff of dust. The rider's head turned. He reined in his horse, scanning the area. She threw another rock. This one clattered across a flat sheet of stone, the sound sharper, more distinct. He turned his horse toward her. As he approached, details emerged from the glare. A broad-brimmed hat pulled low against the sun. A faded blue shirt rolled to the elbows. Leather chaps stained with trail dust. A rifle resting across his saddle. He was Anglo, white, weathered, face dark from sun and wind. His eyes were narrow, cautious, as he dismounted and approached slowly, hand resting near the revolver at his hip. He stopped 3 paces away, taking in the scene. Her torn clothes, her swollen belly, the blood staining the dirt beneath her. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. He crouched down, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. "Ma'am," he said, voice low and rough from disuse. "You hurt bad?" She tried to answer, but another contraction seized her, and all that came out was a choked cry. He swore under his breath, glancing back at his horse, as if calculating distances and options. When the contraction passed, she managed to gasp out a single word. "Water." He moved quickly then, returning with a canteen. He lifted her head gently, supporting her neck as he tipped water into her mouth. She drank too fast, choked, coughed. He pulled it back, waiting, then offered it again. This time she managed to swallow. The water was warm and tasted of metal, but it was life itself pouring down her throat. "Easy," he murmured. "Don't make yourself sick." She drank until he pulled it away, then sagged back against his arm. Her vision cleared slightly. She could see his face now, maybe 30 years old, maybe older. Hard to tell with men who lived under open sky. His jaw was covered in several days' worth of beard, his hair dark brown and shaggy beneath the hat. But his eyes were steady, clear, not cruel. "The baby," she managed. "Coming." He glanced down at her belly, then back at her face. "How long have you been out here?" "Since dawn. Cast out?" She nodded, grateful she didn't have to explain. He'd lived in Apache territory long enough to understand. His jaw tightened, but he didn't comment on the injustice of it. Instead, he looked around, assessing the landscape with the practiced eye of a man who'd survived in worse places. "Can't deliver a baby out here in the open," he said. "Nearest town's 2 days north, but there's a line shack about 3 miles west. Used to work cattle in this basin. Shack's probably half collapsed, but it'll have walls and a roof. Can you ride?" "I don't know. You're gonna have to try." He stood and brought his horse over, a rangy paint gelding with intelligent eyes and a calm demeanor. The horse didn't spook at her scent or condition, which told her the animal had seen strange things before. The cowboy tied his bedroll and saddlebags tighter, making room, then turned back to her. "I'm gonna lift you now." "It's gonna hurt," she nodded. He bent down, sliding one arm behind her shoulders and another beneath her knees. When he lifted, the world tilted violently and pain exploded through her midsection. She bit down on a scream, tasting blood where her teeth cut into her lip. He moved quickly, settling her sideways across the saddle in front of where he'd sit. She clutched the saddle horn with both hands, doubled over, breathing through her teeth. He swung up behind her, one arm wrapping around her waist to hold her steady. "Hold on best you can. We're gonna move fast." The horse leapt forward into a ground-eating lope. Each stride sent shockwaves through her body. She clung to consciousness by sheer will, focusing on the rhythm of the hoofbeats, the solid warmth of the man's arm around her, the smell of horse sweat and leather. Time dissolved into a blur of motion and pain. She faded in and out, catching fragments, the sun's angle changing, the landscape shifting from open basin to rocky outcrop. The horse's breathing growing heavier. When they finally stopped, she didn't realize it at first. The cessation of movement felt unreal. She blinked, trying to focus. They were in front of a small structure made of stacked stone and weathered timber. Half the roof had caved in on one side, but the other half held. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. He dismounted and lifted her down with the same care as before. This time, when the contraction hit, she screamed. It tore out of her without permission, raw and primal. He half carried, half dragged her inside, laying her down on a relatively clean patch of dirt floor, away from the collapsed section. Sunlight streamed through gaps in the roof, illuminating swirls of dust in the still air. "I need to see how far along you are," he said, already moving to untie his bedroll. "I'm gonna be straight with you. I've birthed calves and foals, but never a human baby. But the basics are probably the same." She would have laughed if she'd had the strength. Instead, she just nodded, gripping her knees as another contraction built. He spread his blanket beneath her, then knelt between her legs, pushing her tunic up with clinical efficiency. His hands were surprisingly gentle as he examined her. When he looked up, his expression was grim. "Baby's coming soon." "Real soon. You got maybe an hour, probably less. Will we live?" The question came out smaller than she intended. He met her eyes directly. "I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you do. Both of you." That's a promise. Something in the way he said it, absolute, unshakable, made her believe him. He moved around the shack quickly, gathering what little was there. An old bucket with a crack in the bottom, some rope hanging from a nail, a rusted knife that he held up to the light, frowning at before setting aside in favor of his own blade. He built a small fire near the entrance, using deadwood from the collapsed roof section, then set the bucket outside to catch drips from his canteen. Not enough water, not nearly enough. But it would have to do. The contractions intensified. She lost all sense of time, existing only in waves of agony that crested and crashed with ruthless regularity. He stayed beside her, one hand on her shoulder, talking in a low, steady voice. She couldn't make out most of the words, but the tone mattered, calm, certain, present. "All right," he said, after what might have been minutes or hours. "Next contraction, you're gonna push. Hard as you can." She did. The world reduced to pressure and pain, and the sound of her own screaming. He barked encouragement, instructions, but it was all distant thunder beneath the roar in her head. Push, breathe, push again. Her body was being torn in half. She was going to die here in this collapsed shack with a stranger whose name she didn't even know, and her baby would die too, and no one would ever find them. "Heads out," he said, voice sharp with focus. "One more. Come on." She bore down with everything left in her, and suddenly the pressure released. A new sound filled the shack, thin, warbling, but unmistakably alive. A baby's cry. She collapsed back, gasping, tears streaming down her face. The cowboy worked quickly, using his knife to cut the cord, tying it off with practiced efficiency. He wrapped the baby in his extra shirt, a tiny, squirming bundle covered in blood and vernix. Then he placed the child on her chest. "Boy," he said simply. "Small, but breathing good." Kiona stared down at her son, unable to process that he was real, that they'd both survived. He was perfect. Impossibly, miraculously perfect. She touched his tiny hand, and his fingers curled reflexively around hers. The tears came harder then, but they weren't from pain. The cowboy sat back on his heels, exhaling hard. His hands were shaking slightly, the first sign of anything other than complete control. He wiped them on his pants, leaving streaks of blood, then stood to tend the fire. The sun was setting now, casting orange light through the gaps in the walls. The temperature would drop fast once night came. "You got a name?" he asked after a while. "Kiona. Mine's Daniel. Daniel Brennan." He paused, feeding another stick into the fire. "Kiona, I'm going to be real with you. You lost some blood. Not sure how much, but more than I'd like. And that baby needs to eat soon, needs to stay warm. We can't stay here long. Come morning, if you can sit a horse, we need to move." "Where?" "Town called Redemption, about a day and a half north. Got a doctor there, real one. And a sheriff who doesn't care much what tribe folks come from, long as they don't cause trouble." She looked down at her son, still tucked against her chest, his eyes closed and face peaceful. "They won't want us there." An Apache woman with a half-breed child. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that made her look up. "Then we'll make them want you there. One way or another. The fire crackled. Outside, coyotes began their evening songs. And in that moment, in that broken-down shack in the middle of nowhere, with a stranger who'd saved her life for no reason except that it needed saving, Kiona felt the first stirring of something she thought she'd lost forever. Hope. Dawn came with the kind of cold that seeps into bones. Kiona woke to find Daniel already up, coaxing the fire back to life with dry grass and splinters of wood. The baby slept against her chest, swaddled in Daniel's shirt and her own body heat. Every muscle in her body ached. The space between her legs felt raw, torn, but she was alive. They were both alive. Daniel glanced over when he heard her stir. "How are you feeling?" "Like I was trampled by horses." "That's about right." He poured water from his canteen into a battered tin cup and brought it to her. "Drink slow. We're low on water, but you need it more than I do." She sipped carefully, watching him move around the shack with efficient purpose. He'd cleaned up during the night. The blanket she lay on was different from the blood-stained one, and he'd buried the afterbirth outside somewhere. His own shirt was gone, given to the baby, leaving him in just a thin undershirt that showed the lean muscle of someone who worked hard for a living. There was a long scar across his left forearm, white and old. "You didn't sleep," she observed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Kept watch. Wolves came sniffing around midnight, but the fire kept them off. He settled back by the flames, pulling a strip of dried meat from his saddlebag. He tore it in half and offered her a piece. "It's not much, but it'll give you strength." She took it, chewing slowly. The salt and smoke taste was overwhelming after a day without food. "Why are you helping me?" Daniel was quiet for a moment, turning his own piece of jerky between his fingers. "Because nobody else would. That's not a reason. It's the only reason that matters." He bit into the meat, chewing thoughtfully. He had a sister once, Sarah. She got herself in trouble with a ranch hand who promised her the world. He ran off the second she told him about the baby. "My father threw her out, said she'd shame the family. I was 16, too young and too stupid to stand up to him the way I should have." His voice remained steady, but something in his eyes had gone distant. "She made it to Santa Fe, worked in the laundry until the baby came. Died 3 days later from fever. The baby died too. By the time I found out and got there, they'd already been in the ground for 2 weeks. No marker, no nothing, just gone." Kiona watched him in the growing light. The scar on his arm, the hard set of his jaw. The way his hands never quite stopped moving, always finding something to do. "How old are you?" 28. You?" 22. He nodded, still not looking at her. "After Sarah died, I left home. Couldn't stand to look at my father anymore, knowing what he'd done. Spent years drifting. Worked cattle drives, broke horses, took whatever jobs paid. Kept thinking if I moved far enough, worked hard enough, maybe I'd stop seeing her face." He finally looked up. "But you don't outrun that kind of thing." So I stopped trying. Now when I see someone who needs help, I help them. Simple as that. The baby stirred, making small mewling sounds. Kiona adjusted him, bringing him to her breast. He latched immediately, hungry and insistent. She winced at the pain but didn't pull away. Daniel stood and moved toward the door, giving her privacy. "Daniel," she said. He stopped. "Thank you." "For telling me." He nodded once and stepped outside. The sun climbed higher, warming the air inside the shack. Kiona held her son, studying every detail of his face. He had her nose, her dark hair, but his skin tone was lighter, a bridge between two worlds. Neither tribe would fully claim him. The Apache had cast her out. The white settlements would see only Indian blood. Her son would walk between worlds, belonging nowhere, unless she made a place for him. Daniel returned an hour later with his horse saddled and supplies repacked. "We should move while the morning's still cool. It's gonna be rough going, but we'll take it slow. I can ride." She wasn't sure if it was true, but she'd make it true through will if necessary. He helped her to her feet. Her legs shook, and the world tilted alarmingly for a moment before steadying. Daniel's arm was solid around her waist, holding her upright without comment. They made their way outside, where the paint horse stood waiting, patient as stone. Getting her into the saddle took time and caused enough pain that she had to bite down hard to keep from crying out. Daniel mounted behind her again, one arm securing her and the baby, while the other held the reins. They set off at a careful walk, heading north toward a horizon that shimmered with heat even in the early morning. As they rode, Daniel told her about Redemption. It was a small town, he said, built at the junction of 3 trade routes. Miners passed through, heading to the silver claims in the mountains. Ranchers brought cattle to the railhead. Traders moved goods between territories. It was rough but relatively lawful, run by a sheriff named Marcus Holloway, who'd been a Union officer during the war and had no patience for cruelty. Doc Pritchard's good, Daniel continued. Old cavalry surgeon? Drinks too much, but his hands are steady when it counts. He'll look after you and the baby. And after that? After that you decide what you want to do. What I want doesn't matter. I'm Apache. They'll see me and see an enemy. Some will. Not all. Daniel shifted slightly in the saddle. There's a woman there, Clara Jennings. Runs the boarding house. She's got no love for prejudice. Lost her husband to a fever. Raised 2 daughters on her own. She'll give you a fair chance if you want work. Kiona said nothing. The idea of living in a white town, working for white people, raising her son among strangers who might hate him, it felt impossible. But what other choice did she have? Her tribe had made their judgment. She was dead to them. Going back would mean death for real. They rode in silence for a while, the landscape slowly changing from stark desert to rolling hills dotted with juniper and pinon. The baby slept, lulled by the horse's movement. Kiona's thoughts drifted backward, to the events that had led to this moment. It had been autumn when he arrived. Thomas Reed, a fur trader working his way south through Apache territory with permission from the council. He'd been charming, educated, different from the rough trappers who usually pass through. He spoke Spanish and some Apache phrases, enough to show respect. He'd sit by the evening fires and tell stories about the cities he'd seen, San Francisco, New Orleans, and places Kiona had only heard mentioned in whispers. She'd been drawn to him, despite her mother's warnings. Men like that are wind, her mother had said. They blow through and leave nothing but dust. But Kiona had been young and restless, tired of the endless routine of gathering and weaving, of watching the same people do the same things year after year. Thomas represented something else. Possibility, escape. They'd met in secret. He'd promised her things, a home in Santa Fe, a life beyond the tribe's boundaries, freedom to be more than what tradition demanded. She'd believed him. More fool she. When she'd told him about the baby, his face had changed. The warmth had drained from his eyes like water through sand. He'd left 2 days later, claiming urgent business in Colorado. He never came back. For 3 months she'd hidden the pregnancy, wore loose clothing, avoided communal bathing, made excuses for her changing body. But eventually, her mother knew. Then the elders. A council was called. Questions were asked that she couldn't answer without condemning herself. The father's identity, the circumstances, the betrayal of tribal law. Her mother had wept. Her younger brother had stood silent, fists clenched, unable to meet her eyes. The council elder, a man named Nietzsche who'd known her since birth, had spoken the judgment with a voice like breaking stone. You have brought shame to your family and your people. You cannot remain among us. At dawn you will be taken beyond our lands and released. What happens after is the will of the spirits. She'd spent that last night alone in her family's dwelling. Her mother had brought her food but wouldn't speak, wouldn't touch her. The silence had been worse than any words. At dawn, hands had pulled her from sleep and marched her to the canyon's edge. No one had said goodbye. Now riding north with a stranger and a newborn, that moment felt both impossibly distant and sharp as yesterday. She'd lost everything. Her name, her family, her place in the world. All because she'd believed a lie told by a man with kind eyes. You're quiet, Daniel said, thinking about the father. The man who did this to me. Daniel's arm tightened slightly around her waist. He have a name. Thomas Reed, fur trader. He's probably in Colorado by now, spending money and forgetting I exist. Men like that usually do. There was an edge in Daniel's voice now, something cold and final. Might be he'll face justice eventually. Might not. But that's not your burden to carry. It feels like my burden. I'm the one cast out. I'm the one who'll be marked forever. You're the one who survived. There's a difference. They crested a ridge, and the land opened up before them, a vast expanse of grassland rolling toward distant mountains. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and rain. Storm clouds gathered on the northern horizon, dark and heavy. We need to find shelter before that hits, Daniel said. There's a creek about 2 miles ahead with some cottonwoods. We can wait it out there. They made it to the creek just as the first drops began to fall. Daniel quickly set up a lean-to using his oilskin tarp and some fallen branches, creating a small protected space. The rain came hard and fast, drumming on the canvas above them. The temperature dropped sharply. Kiona huddled with the baby, trying to keep him warm. Daniel built a small fire, using wood he'd collected before the rain started, the smoke venting out through gaps in the makeshift shelter. For a while, neither of them spoke. The storm filled the silence with its own voice, thunder rolling across the plains like artillery, lightning splitting the sky in jagged white lines. "I need to tell you something," Daniel said eventually. The firelight made his face look older, more worn. "When we get to Redemption, there's going to be talk. A white man riding in with an Apache woman and a newborn. People will make assumptions. Let them assume. It's not that simple. There are men in that town who fought Apaches during the war. Men who lost friends, family. They're not going to be welcoming. Then why take me there? Because it's the best option we have. But I need you to understand, things might get difficult. People might say things, do things, and I can't protect you from all of it, much as I'd like to." Kiona met his gaze steadily. "I don't expect you to protect me. You've already done more than anyone had a right to ask." "Maybe, but I'm seeing this through. You and the baby both." He poked at the fire, sending up sparks. "I'm going to tell people the truth, that I found you dying in the desert and helped deliver the baby. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly. You'd fight for us. For strangers, I'd fight for what's right. You and the baby, you're both innocent in all this. You deserve a chance to live without fear. That's not charity, that's basic human decency." The rain continued through the afternoon and into the evening. They shared the last of Daniel's provisions, more dried meat, some hardtack that had to be soaked in water to be edible, a handful of withered apples from his saddlebag. It wasn't much, but it was enough. As darkness fell, Kiona nursed the baby again, whispering to him in Apache. Words of protection, words of blessing. Daniel pretended not to listen, but she saw the way he tilted his head slightly, catching the rhythm of the language, even if he didn't understand the meaning. "What's his name?" Daniel asked when she finished. She'd been thinking about this since birth. Traditional Apache naming ceremonies happened after the first month, after survival was more certain. But she was no longer bound by tradition. She could name him herself, give him an identity that was hers to define. "Kai," she said. "It means willow tree, strong but flexible. Survives in hard places." "Kai Whitehorse," Daniel repeated. "It's a good name. Just Kai. The Whitehorse name is dead to me now." Daniel nodded slowly. "Then Kai it is." The storm passed during the night. Morning came clear and cold. The air washed clean. They packed up and continued north, making better time now that the ground had been dampened and the dust settled. By midday, they could see smoke rising in the distance, the first sign of human habitation. "That's Redemption," Daniel said. "We'll be there by late afternoon." Kiona's stomach tightened. Everything was about to change again. She looked down at Kai, sleeping peacefully in her arms, oblivious to the complicated world he'd been born into. She'd do whatever it took to give him a better life than the one she'd had, even if that meant living among people who hated her, even if it meant swallowing her pride and accepting charity from strangers, even if it meant leaving behind everything she'd ever known and becoming someone new. The sun climbed higher as they rode, and with each mile, the smoke on the horizon grew thicker. By the time they reached the outskirts of Redemption, Kiona's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. This was it, the beginning of whatever came next. Daniel felt her tension and spoke quietly. "You don't have to be afraid." "I'm not afraid," she lied. "All right then. You don't have to pretend you're not afraid, despite everything." That almost made her smile, almost. They rode into town as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, casting long shadows across the dusty main street. And with them rode a story that would change Redemption forever. Whether the town was ready for it or not, Redemption wasn't much to look at. A single main street lined with false-fronted buildings that had seen better days. A general store with painted letters peeling in the sun. A saloon with bat-wing doors hanging crooked on their hinges. A blacksmith's forge, sending up sparks and the ring of hammer on an anvil. Maybe 24 structures in total, scattered like dice, thrown by a careless hand. But it had people. And those people stopped what they were doing the moment Daniel Brennan rode down Main Street with an Apache woman, cradled in his arms, and a newborn baby wrapped in his shirt. The silence spread like spilled oil. A woman carrying a basket of laundry froze mid-step. 2 men outside the saloon let their conversation die. A group of children playing in the street scattered their mother's skirts. Even the blacksmith's hammer stopped ringing. Daniel kept the paint horse at a steady walk, his face neutral, but his eyes alert. Kiona felt every stare like a brand against her skin. She kept her gaze forward, chin up, refusing to show fear, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. Kai stirred in her arms, sensing her tension. They stopped in front of a building with a hand-painted sign, Dr. E. Pritchard, physician. Daniel dismounted first, then reached up to help Kiona down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground, but his arm was there, steady and sure. "I got you," he murmured, too low for anyone else to hear. The door to the doctor's office opened before they reached it. A man stepped out. 60 if he was a day, with white hair wild as a prophet's and spectacles perched on a nose mapped with broken veins. He took in the scene with sharp eyes that had seen too much to be easily shocked. "Daniel Brennan," he said, voice rough as creek gravel. "Been almost a year since you came through." "Didn't expect you'd bring company?" Doc Pritchard. "This is Kiona. She gave birth 2 days ago in the desert. She needs examination. The baby, too." Pritchard's eyes flicked to Kiona, then to the bundle in her arms. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. "Apache." "Does it matter?" Daniel's voice carried an edge now, for medical purposes. "Not for keeping my windows intact?" "Maybe." But Pritchard was already stepping aside, gesturing them in. "Come on then. Let's see what we're dealing with." The office smelled of carbolic acid and old leather. Examination table against one wall, desk piled with papers and medical texts, cabinets filled with bottles and instruments. Pritchard directed Kiona to the table, his movements brisk but not unkind. "I'm going to examine you and the child," he said directly to her, not to Daniel. "It may be uncomfortable. Do you understand English?" "Yes." Her voice came stronger than she felt. "Good. Let's start with the baby." Kiona unwrapped Kai slowly, protective instincts warring with the need for medical care. Pritchard took the infant with practiced hands, laying him on a clean cloth and conducting a thorough examination. He checked eyes, ears, nose, mouth. Listened to the heart and lungs, examined the umbilical cord stump. His face remained impassive throughout. "Baby's small but healthy," he finally announced. "Breathing's good, color's good, reflexes are appropriate. You did decent work with the cord, Daniel. Cleaner than some midwives I've seen. Had practice with livestock. Well, children aren't that different. Just louder and more expensive." Pritchard wrapped Kai back up and handed him to Kiona. "Now you." "Daniel, wait outside." "Duck outside, son." "The lady deserves privacy." Daniel hesitated, then nodded and stepped into the front room, closing the door behind him. Pritchard turned back to Kiona, his demeanor shifting slightly. Softer somehow, less clinical. "I need to examine you internally," he said. "Check for tearing. Make sure everything's healing as it should. I'll be as gentle as possible, but it won't be pleasant." Kiona nodded. She'd endured worse. The examination was thorough and painful. Pritchard worked with efficient care, narrating what he was doing in calm, matter-of-fact tones. When he finished, he helped her sit up and handed her a glass of water. "You've got some tearing, but nothing that won't heal with time and rest. You lost a fair amount of blood, which explains why you're weak. I'm going to give you some iron tonic. Tastes like horse piss, but it'll help. Keep the area clean, don't lift anything heavy, and for God's sake don't try to ride a horse for at least 2 weeks. I don't have 2 weeks. I don't have anywhere to stay." Pritchard removed his spectacles and cleaned them on his shirt. "That's not a medical problem, but I might know someone who can help." He raised his voice. "Daniel, get in here!" The door opened immediately. Daniel stepped in, his expression carefully neutral. "She all right? She'll live." "Both of them will, barring complications. But she needs rest and decent food." Pritchard fixed Daniel with a look. "You planning on taking responsibility here?" "I brought her here, didn't I?" "That's not what I asked." "Then yes, I'm seeing this through." Pritchard nodded slowly, as if confirming something he'd already suspected. "Clara Jennings owes me a favor. Lost her youngest to scarlet fever last winter. I sat with the family for 3 days, didn't charge a cent. She's got room at the boarding house. I'll talk to her. I can pay," Kiona said quickly. "I can work." Both men looked at her. Pritchard's expression was unreadable. Daniel's was something close to respect. "We'll figure it out," Daniel said. "First thing is getting you somewhere you can rest properly." Pritchard scribbled something on a piece of paper and handed it to Daniel. "That's for the tonic. McGilvray at the general store will fill it. Tell him I said to put it on my account." He turned to Kiona. "You did well, considering. Most women would have died out there. You've got spine." It wasn't exactly a compliment, but coming from him, it felt like one. They left the doctor's office to find a small crowd had gathered across the street. "Mostly women," Kiona noted. "Some are openly curious, others hostile." One spat deliberately in the dirt as they emerged. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he kept walking, guiding Kiona toward the general store. Inside, the store was dim and cluttered, every surface covered with goods. Flour sacks, bolts of cloth, tools, canned foods, rope, ammunition. A man stood behind the counter, McGilvray presumably, middle-aged and balding, with the shrewd eyes of someone who'd spent a lifetime weighing value. His gaze landed on Kiona and didn't move. Daniel handed him the paper. "Doc Pritchard said you'd fill this." McGilvray took it, read it, then set it down deliberately. "That's for her. That's what the prescription says. I don't serve Indians." The words dropped like stones into still water. Kiona felt them settle in her gut, familiar and cold. She'd expected this, had steeled herself for it. But knowing it was coming didn't make it hurt less. Daniel's voice went very quiet. "You serve whoever needs serving. That's the nature of a general store. This is my store. I serve who I please, and Doc Pritchard is one of your best customers. You really want to tell him you refused a prescription he wrote?" McGilvray's mouth thinned. The calculation was visible on his face. Weigh the principle against the profit. After a long moment he turned and began gathering bottles from the shelf behind him. He worked in pointed silence, measuring and mixing with exaggerated care. When he finished, he set the bottle on the counter with more force than necessary. "That'll be $2. Doc said his account. Doc can settle with me later." "You pay now." Daniel pulled coins from his pocket and counted them out slowly, deliberately. The money clinked onto the wood. McGilvray swept it up without a word. They left without thanking him. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, painting the street in shades of amber and rust. Daniel led them toward the far end of town, where a 2-story structure stood slightly apart from the others. A sign hung from the porch, "Jennings Boarding House." The building was neat, well-maintained. Flower boxes under the windows, though the flowers had long since withered. Shutters painted a faded blue. A rocking chair on the porch, empty but inviting. Daniel knocked. Footsteps approached from inside, quick and light. The door opened to reveal a woman in her 40s, dark hair shot with silver, wearing a practical dress with the sleeves rolled up. Her eyes were grey and sharp, taking in the scene with the rapid assessment of someone used to making quick decisions. "Daniel Brennan," she said, surprise colouring her voice. Didn't know you were back in town. Just arrived. Mrs. Jennings, I need to ask a favor. Her eyes moved to Kiona and Kai, lingering there. I see. Doc Pritchard sent word you might be coming. Come in. She stepped back, opening the door wider. The interior was clean and simply furnished. A front parlor with worn but comfortable chairs. A staircase leading up. The smell of cooking, beans and cornbread, drifting from somewhere in back. Clara Jennings gestured toward the parlor. Sit, you look like you're about to fall over. Kiona sank into a chair gratefully. Kai had started fussing, hungry again. Clara noticed and nodded toward a door. There's a private room through there if you need to nurse him. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We need to talk terms. Clara sat across from them, hands folded in her lap. Doc Pritchard told me the situation. Apache woman, newborn, no family, no resources. That about cover it? Kiona bristled at the bluntness, but forced herself to stay calm. I can work. I'm strong, not for at least 2 weeks, according to Pritchard. And even then, what work? Most folks in this town won't hire an Indian. That's just the truth of it. Then I'll leave. Find somewhere else. And go where? You've got a days-old baby and no supplies. You wouldn't make it a week. Clara's voice wasn't cruel, just factual. I'm not trying to be harsh. I'm trying to be realistic, Daniel leaned forward. What are you proposing? She stays here. I've got a room in back that's empty, small but private. She gets board and lodging in exchange for work once she's healed. Laundry, cleaning, cooking, mending. Standard arrangement. And the baby? Babies are loud and messy, but they're also temporary. He grows. He gets quieter. I've raised 2 of my own. I can tolerate 1 more. Kiona looked at this woman, this stranger offering shelter when her own people had cast her out. Why would you do this? Clara met her gaze steadily. Because 20 years ago, I was in a situation not too different from yours. No husband, 2 babies, no prospects. Someone gave me a chance when they didn't have to. I'm paying that forward. But make no mistake, this isn't charity. You work, you earn your keep. Are we clear? Clear. Good. Clara stood. Let me show you the room. Daniel, you can head to the kitchen if you're hungry. Beans are on. The room was small, as promised. Just big enough for a bed, a chair, and a small dresser. But it had a window that faced east, letting in morning light. The bed had clean sheets, a real pillow, a quilt that looked hand-stitched. After 2 nights in the desert and a line shack, it looked like a palace. I'll bring you some hot water for washing, Clara said. And I've got some old baby clothes from my daughters. They're packed away, but they're clean, Mrs. Jennings. Clara, we don't stand on formality here. Clara, I don't know how to repay this. I just told you, work. That's all the repayment I need. She paused at the door. One more thing. There's going to be talk. Probably already is. Some folks are going to have ugly things to say. I can't control that. What I can control is what happens under my roof. Anyone gives you trouble here, you tell me. Understood. Kiona nodded, throat tight. After Clara left, Kiona sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the softness of the mattress beneath her, the safety of walls around her. Kai nursed eagerly, his small hands kneading against her. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of exhaustion. Her body ached, her heart ached, but she was safe. For now, that was enough. A knock at the door. Daniel's voice. Can I come in? Yes. He entered carrying a tray with a bowl of beans, cornbread, and a cup of milk. Clara said to bring you this. Said you need to eat. He set the tray on the dresser, then lingered awkwardly, as if unsure whether to stay or go. Kiona finished nursing Kai and settled him in the crook of her arm before reaching for the food. The beans were simple but hot, seasoned with salt pork and onions. The cornbread was fresh. She ate ravenously, not realizing how hungry she'd been. Daniel watched her eat, then spoke quietly. I'm staying in town for a while. Got enough saved to rent a room above the saloon. If you need anything, you've done enough. Maybe, but I'm staying anyway. He moved toward the door, then stopped. Kiona, what happened to you, being cast out, nearly dying, all of it? That wasn't your fault. I need you to know that. She looked up at him, this stranger who'd saved her life for no reason, except that it was right. Why does it matter what I know? Because people are going to try to make you feel like you deserved it, like you brought it on yourself, and you need to know deep in your bones, that they're wrong." He left before she could respond. Kiona finished eating, then lay down on the bed with Kai beside her, protected by pillows on either side. Through the window, she could hear the sounds of redemption settling into evening. Voices, laughter, the tinny sound of a piano from the saloon. Normal life carrying on. She wasn't part of that life. Not yet, maybe never. But she had a roof over her head, food in her stomach, and a son who was alive and healthy. It was more than she'd had 3 days ago. More than she'd thought possible when her own people had pushed her into the desert to die. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Hostile stares, cruel words, the grinding work of survival. But tonight, in this small room with its clean sheets and eastern window, she allowed herself something she hadn't felt in months: peace outside. The stars emerged one by one, filling the vast desert sky with light. And in that light, Kiona Whitehorse, no longer Whitehorse, just Kiona, closed her eyes and slept without dreaming. The first week passed in a blur of sleep and feeding. Kiona's body demanded rest, and Clara enforced it with the firmness of someone who'd learned hard lessons about ignoring recovery. Every time Kiona tried to help with chores, Clara pointed her back to the room. "You're no good to me," collapsed on the floor. Heal first, work later, but by the second week, restlessness set in. Kiona couldn't stay in that small room indefinitely, watching the world through a window while others lived their lives. Her body still ached, but the sharp edges of pain had dulled to manageable discomfort. When Clara came to check on her one morning, Kiona was already dressed. Kai wrapped securely against her chest in a sling Clara had fashioned from old fabric. "I'm ready to work," Kiona said. Clara studied her with those sharp grey eyes. "You sure?" Pritchard said 2 weeks minimum. "It's been 13 days. "Close enough." A small smile tugged at Clara's mouth. "Stubborn. Good. I can work with stubborn." She gestured toward the door. "Come on then. Let's see what you can do." The boarding house had 3 other residents, a traveling salesman who was rarely present, an elderly widow named Mrs. Halloway, who kept to herself, and a young schoolteacher named Rebecca Foster, who'd come west from Philadelphia to teach the town's children. The house needed constant maintenance, meals 3 times a day, laundry every other day, floors swept daily, linens changed weekly. Clara started Kiona with simple tasks: peeling potatoes, folding laundry, sweeping the back porch. Nothing that required heavy lifting or strenuous movement. Kiona worked methodically, finding rhythm in the repetition. Kai slept against her chest, warm and content, occasionally stirring to nurse before drifting back to sleep. Rebecca, the schoolteacher, was the first to speak to her beyond basic courtesies. She appeared in the kitchen one afternoon while Kiona was washing dishes, her arms full of books. "I'm Rebecca," she said, setting the books on the table. "I know we haven't properly met. I wanted to say what you've been through coming here like this. It takes courage." Kiona didn't look up from the dishes. "Or desperation. Sometimes those are the same thing." Rebecca picked at the corner of one book's cover. "I'm not from here either. Came 6 months ago. Some people still treat me like I'm an oddity. A woman teacher, educated back east, no husband. They don't quite know what to make of me. That's not the same." "No," Rebecca agreed quietly. "It's not. But loneliness is loneliness, regardless of the reason." She paused. "If you ever want to talk about anything, my door's open." It was a small offering, but genuine. Kiona nodded, and Rebecca left with her books, seeming satisfied. Daniel came by most evenings, usually around dusk. He'd sit on the back porch steps while Kiona rocked Kai, and they'd talk about inconsequential things. The weather, the quality of the well water, the traveling salesman's stories about railroad expansion. Neither mentioned the desert or the birth or what had brought them together. Those subjects sat between them like stones too heavy to lift. But one evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Daniel brought something different. "A rifle, what's that for?" Kiona asked. "You?" He leaned it carefully against the porch railing. "Winchester 73, good, reliable gun. I want to teach you to shoot." "Why?" "Because you should know how to defend yourself." And because sitting around doing laundry isn't going to be enough for you much longer, he wasn't wrong. The domestic work was necessary, even satisfying in its way, but it didn't fill the restless space inside her. She'd grown up learning to track, to hunt, to read the land. Those skills were useless here, replaced by recipes and washing schedules. When? She asked. Tomorrow, early, before the town wakes up. There's a clearing north of here where we won't be disturbed. The next morning, with Kai secured in his sling and Clara's blessing secured with a promise to be back for breakfast preparation, Kiona met Daniel at the edge of town. The air was cool and clean, the sky just beginning to lighten. They walked in comfortable silence until they reached a clearing surrounded by cottonwoods, a natural hollow where sound would be dampened. Daniel set up targets, tin cans balanced on a fallen log about 30 yards away. Then he showed her the rifle, how to hold it, how to sight down the barrel, how to breathe and squeeze rather than pull the trigger. It's going to kick, he warned. Brace yourself. The first shot went wide, the recoil slamming into her shoulder hard enough to make her stumble. The second hit dirt 3 feet in front of the targets. The third actually clipped the log, sending splinters flying. By the 10th shot, she'd hit her first can, sending it spinning into the grass. Better, Daniel said. Again, they practiced for an hour. Her shoulder would be bruised tomorrow, but each shot felt more natural, more controlled. When they finally stopped, she'd hit 6 out of 10 targets. Not great, but not terrible either. You've got steady hands, Daniel observed, cleaning the rifle with an oiled cloth. And you don't flinch. That's harder to teach than aim. My father taught me to use a bow when I was 7. Same principles. Stillness, breath, focus. Can you still shoot a bow? I haven't touched one since I left the tribe. Daniel was quiet for a moment, wiping down the Winchester's barrel with methodical care. Might be worth remembering. Skills like that don't disappear just because the circumstances change. They walked back as the sun cleared the horizon. Kiona felt something shift inside her, not quite confidence, but the seed of it. The rifle had felt foreign at first, but by the end it had simply felt like a tool, something she could master with practice. Over the following weeks, the pattern established itself. Mornings started with chores, cooking, cleaning, laundry. Kai grew stronger, more alert, his eyes beginning to focus and track movement. Clara proved to be a patient teacher, showing Kiona how to make proper bread, how to get stains out of fabric, how to stretch ingredients to feed more people than seemed mathematically possible. You're a quick study, Clara said one afternoon as they kneaded dough together. Most girls take twice as long to learn what you pick up in a day. I'm used to learning by watching. Apache children learn that way. Observe, remember, practice. Not so different from how I learned then. My mother ran a boarding house in St. Louis. I grew up in a kitchen. Clara's hands worked the dough with practiced efficiency. You have family back there? Besides the ones who cast you out. A mother, a younger brother, an uncle who taught me to track. Kiona focused on the dough, not meeting Clara's eyes. They're all dead to me now. That's how it works. Maybe, or maybe time changes things. Not this. This was judgment, not anger. There's no coming back from judgment. Clara didn't argue, just shaped her dough into a loaf and set it to rise. 3 times a week, weather permitting, Kiona met Daniel at dawn for shooting practice. The rifle became an extension of her will. She learned to compensate for wind, to adjust for distance, to shoot from different positions, standing, kneeling, prone. Daniel was a patient but demanding teacher, never satisfied with good enough when better was possible. Why are you doing this? She asked one morning after a particularly intense session. Teaching me all this? Daniel checked the rifle's sight, making a small adjustment. Because you need to be more than someone who survived. You need to be someone who can't be pushed around. I'm a woman alone with a baby. I'll always be vulnerable. Only if you believe that. He handed her the rifle. Again, same target, but this time imagine it's something that matters. She took aim at a can balanced on a stump, 50 yards out. Breathed, held, squeezed. The can exploded. Fragments scattering. Good, Daniel said. Now imagine it's Thomas Reed. Her hands tightened on the rifle. The next shot hit so hard it drove the stump backward. Daniel nodded slowly. That's what I'm talking about. Hold on to that. The world respects strength. Make sure you've got it when it matters. But it wasn't just shooting. Clara taught her other skills. How to read people's intentions in the way they held themselves. How to deflect insults without giving ammunition for further attacks. How to present herself in ways that commanded respect rather than pity. Stand straighter, Clara would say. Look people in the eye. You're not asking for permission to exist. You're informing them of a fact. In the afternoons, when Kai napped and the house grew quiet, Rebecca sometimes invited Kiona to sit in on her lessons. The town school was a single room with 15 students ranging from 6 to 14. Rebecca taught with patient enthusiasm, and she welcomed Kiona's presence without making it an issue. Can you read? Rebecca asked one day. Some. A missionary taught basic English and reading when I was young. But not well. Would you like to improve? That's how Kiona found herself, 3 afternoons a week, sitting at the back of the classroom with a primer, learning alongside children a fraction of her age. It should have been humiliating. Instead, it felt like reclaiming something that had been stolen. The ability to understand the written word, to communicate beyond her own language. These were tools, weapons in a different kind of war. She practiced reading wanted posters outside the sheriff's office, store signs, the town newspaper that Clara received weekly. Each word conquered felt like territory claimed. Sheriff Holloway noticed her one afternoon as she stood reading a notice about upcoming territorial elections. He was a tall man, weathered and serious, with grey shot through his dark beard and eyes that missed nothing. "You can read that?" he asked, not unkindly. "I'm learning. Good skill to have." He studied her for a moment. "You're the woman staying with Clara, the one Brennan brought in?" "Yes. Heard there was some trouble at McGilvray's store. He refused to serve you." "He did. That won't happen again. I had a conversation with him about what public accommodation means in my town." Holloway tipped his hat slightly. "You have problems? You come find me. That's what I'm here for. It wasn't friendship, but it was fairness." Kiona nodded her thanks. The town slowly, grudgingly, began to acknowledge her existence beyond hostility. Not acceptance. That would take time if it ever came at all. But a grudging tolerance. The woman at the dry goods store would serve her now, though with tight lips and cold efficiency. The blacksmith nodded when she passed. Mrs. Halloway from the boarding house occasionally said good morning. Small things, but small things accumulated. One evening, as October edged toward November and the air turned sharp with the coming winter, Daniel brought her something else. A leather holster and a Colt revolver, smaller than the rifle but just as deadly. "For when you can't carry the Winchester," he explained. "It's lighter, easier to conceal. But it requires different skills." They practiced behind the boarding house, shooting at targets nailed to hay bales. The revolver had a sharper kick, less forgiving of poor form. But Kiona adapted, finding the rhythm of it. 6 shots, reload 6 more. Her hands learned to move automatically, muscle memory replacing thought. "You're a natural," Daniel said, watching her hit 5 out of 6 targets in rapid succession. "Or I'm motivated not to be helpless again. Whatever works." That night, lying in bed with Kai sleeping beside her, Kiona realized something had shifted. She wasn't the same woman who'd been pushed into the desert. That woman had been defined by shame and abandonment. This woman, the one who could shoot, read, stand straight, meet eyes without flinching, she was something new, something harder. Clara noticed it too. "You walk different now," she said one morning as they prepared breakfast. "Like you've got somewhere to go even when you're standing still. Is that good?" "It's powerful. Good or bad depends on what you do with it." November brought the first snow, light dustings that melted by noon. The boarding house grew busier as travelers sought shelter from the cold. Kiona worked longer hours, her body now fully healed and strong. Kai had grown, his eyes bright and alert, his small hands grasping at everything within reach. She'd been in redemption for nearly 2 months now, long enough that faces had become familiar, long enough that routines felt natural. long enough that she'd almost forgotten what it felt like to live in fear. Almost. Because late one November afternoon, a rider came into town from the south. He stopped at the saloon asking questions. Questions about an Apache woman. Questions about a baby. Questions about a cowboy named Daniel Brennan. Word spread fast in small towns. By evening, Daniel was at the boarding house, his face grim. Clara stood in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed. Kiona held Kai close, already knowing what was coming before anyone spoke. "Someone's looking for you," Daniel said quietly. "A man named Reed, Thomas Reed. He's in town and he's asking questions." The room tilted. The name she'd tried to bury, the man she'd tried to forget, he was here, in redemption. Looking for her. Clara's voice cut through the shock. "What does he want?" "I don't know, but we're about to find out." Daniel's hand rested on the revolver at his hip. "Because he just walked into the saloon and asked where he could find the Apache woman and her half-breed bastard." The words hung in the air like smoke from a gun. Kiona's hands tightened on Kai. Her son, her child, the life she'd built in this town, fragile as it was, all of it threatened by the man who'd destroyed her old life without a second thought. But this time, she wasn't helpless. This time she had skills, weapons, allies. This time she would fight. "Let him come," she said, her voice steady as stone. "I'm not running anymore." Thomas Reed looked exactly as Kiona remembered, and that made it worse somehow. The same easy smile that had once made her heart race now turned her stomach. The same confident posture, the same expensive clothes that marked him as a man of means. He sat at a table in the Silver Dollar Saloon, a glass of whiskey in front of him, surrounded by 3 men who had the hard look of hired guns. Kiona watched from across the street, hidden in the shadowed doorway of the general store. Daniel stood beside her, tense as a coiled spring. Clara had stayed at the boarding house with Kai, along with Sheriff Holloway, who'd been summoned the moment Reed rode into town. "That's him?" Daniel asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's him? The men with him?" "I don't know them, but they're not traitors." Daniel's jaw worked. He brought muscle. "That tells us his intentions aren't friendly." Through the saloon's grimy window, Kiona could see Reed laughing at something one of his companions said. He looked relaxed, comfortable, as if he didn't have a care in the world. As if he hadn't abandoned a pregnant woman to die. As if he hadn't spent months pretending she never existed. "What do you think he wants?" Kiona asked. "Nothing good." Daniel shifted, his hand resting on the revolver at his hip. "Men like that don't travel with guns, unless they're planning to use them. Question is what he's after, you, the baby, or both. The baby has nothing to do with him. Tell him that." They watched for another 10 minutes as Reed held court in the saloon. Other townspeople drifted in and out, some stopping to talk with him, others giving his table a wide berth. McGilvray from the general store spent several minutes in conversation with Reed, gesturing animatedly. That couldn't be good. Finally, Daniel touched her arm. "Come on. We need to get you back to Clara's before he spots you out here." They moved quickly through the darkening streets, keeping to the shadows. The boarding house appeared ahead, lamplight glowing warm in the windows. Sheriff Holloway stood on the porch, his silhouette unmistakable even in the gloom. "He's still at the saloon," Daniel reported as they climbed the steps. "Got 3 men with him, all armed. Been asking around about an Apache woman and a baby?" Holloway's expression was grave. "I heard. McGilvray's been running his mouth, telling Reed where you're staying. Probably hoping for some kind of reward." Kiona felt ice settle in her chest. "He knows I'm here. He'll know by morning if he doesn't already." Holloway removed his hat, turning it in his hands. "Miss Kiona, I need to ask you something direct. This man Reed, is he the father of your child?" She wanted to deny it, to claim some other story, but lies would only make things worse. "Yes, and his intentions when you were together. He promised marriage. A home in Santa Fe. He lied about all of it." Holloway nodded slowly. "And that's what I figured. Men like that." He stopped, choosing his words carefully. "The law's a complicated thing out here. If he claims paternity and demands custody, there's legal precedent. Father's rights supersede the mother's in most territories, especially if the mother is—" He paused awkwardly. Indian, Kiona finished coldly. You can say it. I was going to say unmarried. But yes, being Apache complicates things. Judge might rule in his favor regardless of the circumstances. Like hell, Daniel said, his voice hard as iron. That baby was born in the desert after this man abandoned Kiona to die. He has no rights. Legally speaking, he might. Holloway put his hat back on. But legally speaking is different from what actually happens. I'm telling you how a court might see it. Doesn't mean that's how I see it. Clara appeared in the doorway, Kai in her arms. He's hungry. And you all standing out here having a war council isn't helping matters. They moved inside. Kiona took Kai, retreating to her room to nurse him while the others talked in low voices in the kitchen. But she could hear fragments, jurisdiction, territorial law, property rights. The words made her want to scream. Kai wasn't property. He wasn't a legal question to be debated. He was her son, and no court or law would take him from her. When she emerged, the conversation stopped. Daniel looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read, part concern, part something fiercer. "What's the plan?" she asked. Holloway straightened. "For now, we wait. Reed hasn't made any moves yet. If he comes here, I'll be present to ensure things stay civil. If he tries anything illegal, I'll arrest him. Beyond that," he spread his hands, "we'll have to see what he wants." "I know what he wants," Kiona said. "Control. He can't stand that I survived without him, that I built something here. He wants to destroy it. Then we don't let him," Clara said firmly. "This is my house. I decide who's welcome and who isn't. Reed sets foot here without permission. He'll regret it." They didn't have to wait long. The knock came just after dawn the next morning. Kiona had been awake for hours, unable to sleep, pacing the small room with Kai against her shoulder. She heard the sharp rap of knuckles on wood, heard Clara's heavy footsteps crossing the floor, heard the door open. "Help you?" Clara's voice cold as January ice. "Good morning, ma'am. I'm looking for a woman named Kiona. I was told she's residing here." Reed's voice, smooth as honey, polite as a preacher. Kiona's hands tightened on Kai. "Who's asking?" "Thomas Reed. I'm the father of her child. I've traveled a long way to find them." A pause. Then Clara's voice, even colder. "The father who abandoned her pregnant in the wilderness." "That father? I see she's been telling stories. May I come in?" "I'd like to speak with her directly." "No, ma'am, I have legal rights." "You have the right to leave my property before I fetch the sheriff. That's the only right you have here." Kiona moved to the door of her room, opening it slightly. She could see Clara standing in the doorway, blocking it with her body. Beyond her, Thomas Reed stood on the porch, looking exactly as he had the night before. But now, in daylight, she could see new details. The expensive cut of his coat, the gold watch chain across his vest, the calculated expression of a man used to getting his way. Behind him, two of his hired men waited, hands resting near their guns. "Mrs. Jennings, is it?" Reed's tone shifted, becoming more formal. "I understand you're protective of your tenant. That's admirable. But this is a family matter. I have a right to see my child. You gave up that right when you rode away. I had business obligations. I fully intended to return, and yet you didn't. Not until you heard she'd survived and built a life here. Funny how intentions work." Reed's smile thinned. "I can see this isn't going to be a productive conversation. Perhaps Miss Kiona would be willing to speak for herself. Perhaps she wouldn't." Daniel's voice came from behind Kiona. He'd entered through the back door, moving silently. Now he stood beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. "And perhaps you should state your business and move along." Reed's eyes found Daniel, then shifted to Kiona, standing in the doorway of her room. His expression changed, surprise, calculation, then something that looked almost like wounded feelings but wasn't quite. "Kiona," he said, his voice softening, "you look well. I'm glad to see you've recovered." She said nothing. Kai stirred against her shoulder, making small sounds. "Is that him? May I see my son?" "No." The word came out flat, final. "Kiona, please. I know I made mistakes, but I'm here now. I want to make things right. I want to provide for you both. Give you the life I promised. The life you promised died in the desert. I built a new one without you." Reed's mask slipped slightly, showing irritation beneath the charm. "I see you've made friends here. That's good. But friends aren't family. That child needs a father. I can give him legitimacy, a name, a future. What can you offer him? A life of shame as a half-breed bastard?" Daniel moved forward, his hand dropping to his gun. "You need to leave. Now." Reed didn't back down. "Or what? You'll shoot me in front of the sheriff?" "I don't think so." He shifted his attention back to Kiona. "I'm staying at the hotel. Room 12. When you're ready to talk reasonably, you know where to find me. But understand, I'm not leaving town without my son." He turned and walked away, his hired men falling in behind him. Clara shut the door hard enough to rattle the frame. "That son of a—" She stopped herself, glancing at Kai. "Well, now we know what we're dealing with." Sheriff Holloway arrived within the hour, summoned by Rebecca, who'd witnessed the confrontation from her upstairs window. He listened to their account with increasing concern. "He's not making any illegal demands yet," Holloway said slowly. "Wanting to see his child, wanting to provide for them, that's all within his rights, technically. What about the part where he abandoned her to die?" Daniel demanded. "He'll deny it. Say it's her word against his. And given that she's Apache and he's a white man of means—" Holloway didn't need to finish the sentence. Kiona felt the walls closing in. Everything she'd built, the safety she'd found, the life she'd carved out of nothing, all of it threatened by a man who discarded her like trash and now wanted to reclaim what he viewed as his property. "There has to be something we can do," Clara said. "There is." All eyes turned to Kiona. She stood straighter, Kai held close. "I challenge him, publicly, in front of the whole town. Let him deny abandoning me where everyone can hear." "That's risky," Holloway warned. "Could turn public opinion against you if people believe him instead. Then I'll make sure they don't." Over the next 2 days, Reed made his presence known throughout Redemption. He bought drinks at the saloon, spreading his version of events, how he'd been called away on urgent business, how he'd left Kiona with provisions and promises to return, how he'd been devastated to learn she'd been cast out by her tribe through no fault of his. He painted himself as the concerned father, desperately seeking his child. Some people believed him. Others remained skeptical. McGilvray, predictably, sided with Reed. So did a few of the ranchers who'd lost friends to Apache raids. But Clara's reputation held weight, and Rebecca spoke eloquently about Kiona's character to anyone who would listen. The town found itself divided, uncertain. Daniel spent those days investigating Reed's companions. The 3 hired guns were known quantities, drifters who worked for whoever paid best, with a reputation for violence when needed. One of them, a man named Cutter Hayes, had a warrant out in Colorado for assault. Daniel brought this information to Holloway, who filed it away carefully. On the 3rd day, Reed sent a formal letter to the boarding house. It was written in elegant script on expensive paper, and it outlined his proposal. He would provide Kiona and Kai with a home, financial support, and social standing in exchange for her agreement to raise the child together. The letter made no mention of marriage, no promise of legitimacy. It was a business arrangement, dressed up in flowery language. Kiona read it once, then fed it to the stove fire. That evening, she asked Daniel to teach her one more thing. They went to the clearing north of town, the Winchester and the Colt both loaded. But this time, they didn't shoot at tin cans. "I need to know I won't hesitate," she said, "if it comes to it. If he tries to take Kai, I need to know I can pull the trigger." Daniel set up a man-shaped target made from straw and cloth. "Imagine it's him. Imagine he's reaching for your son." She took aim with the revolver, breathed, fired. The bullet hit the center mass. Again, she fired 5 more times, reloaded, fired 6 more. Every shot hit the target. When she finally lowered the gun, her hands were steady. "You won't hesitate," Daniel said quietly. "No, I won't." They walked back in the darkness. Redemption's lights glowed ahead, small and isolated in the vast empty land. Somewhere in that town, Thomas Reed was planning his next move. Somewhere in that town, people were choosing sides in a conflict they didn't fully understand. But Kiona had made her choice. She would not run. She would not surrender. And if Reed pushed hard enough, She would show him exactly how much she'd changed since he'd ridden away and left her to die. The next morning, Reed made his move. He filed a petition with the territorial court in Santa Fe, claiming paternity and demanding custody of Kai on the grounds that Kiona was an unfit mother, Apache, unmarried, living on charity with no means to properly provide for the child. The petition would take weeks to reach a judge, but its existence changed everything. It's a legal challenge now, Holloway explained grimly. If he wins in court, I'd have to enforce the judgment, no matter what I personally believe. Then we fight it in court, Daniel said. With what? She's got no money for lawyers. And most lawyers won't take a case defending an Apache woman against a white man's claim. Then we find one who will. But finding such a lawyer proved impossible. Every attorney in Redemption and the neighboring towns refused the case. Some were honest about their prejudice. Others claimed conflicts of interest or lack of expertise. The result was the same. Kiona felt the hope she'd built over 2 months begin to crack. The system itself was rigged against her. The law, the courts, the social order, all of it designed to ensure someone like her could never win against someone like Reed, unless she changed the rules. The idea came to her late one night as she sat by the window, watching Kai sleep. Reed wanted legitimacy for his son. He wanted the appearance of propriety, the social standing of a father raising his child. He cared about reputation. That was his weakness. The next morning she went to Rebecca. I need your help. Can you write something for me? Of course. What do you need? A statement. My full story. Everything Reed did. Everything that happened. I want it written down, printed, distributed to every person in this town and beyond. Rebecca's eyes widened. You want to publish your story? Kiona, that will expose everything. Your shame, his crimes, all of it. I have no shame left to protect. But he does. Let's see how he likes having his reputation destroyed. Rebecca smiled slowly. I'll help you. But we'll need a printer. Leave that to me, Clara said from the doorway. She'd been listening. I know someone in Santa Fe who owes me a favor. We can have broadsheets made, distributed throughout the territory. But once we do this, there's no taking it back. Good, Kiona said. I'm tired of hiding. They worked for 3 days on the statement. Rebecca helped shape the words, making them clear and powerful without losing Kiona's voice. Clara added strategic details, dates, locations, corroborating witnesses. Daniel provided information about Reed's hired guns, their criminal backgrounds, the implicit threat they represented. When they finished, it was devastating. A complete account of Thomas Reed's seduction, promises, and abandonment. A description of Kiona's near-death in the desert. The circumstances of Kai's birth. And finally, Reed's return with hired guns. His legal threats. His attempts to use the law as a weapon. The broadsheets were printed and distributed 3 days before Reed's court petition was scheduled to be heard. They appeared everywhere, posted on walls, handed out on streets, distributed to newspapers throughout the territory. Reed's reputation shattered overnight. The confrontation came to a head on a cold November afternoon. Reed stormed into the boarding house, all pretense of civility gone. His face was red with fury, a crumpled broadsheet clutched in his fist. You lying savage, he roared. You've destroyed me. Do you understand what you've done? Kiona stood her ground, the Colt revolver holstered at her hip where everyone could see it. I told the truth. If that destroyed you, the fault is yours. Truth? You've painted me as a monster. You are a monster. You left me to die and now you want to take my child. What else should I call you? Reed took a step forward. Daniel moved to intercept him, but Sheriff Holloway was faster. He stepped between them, hand on his own weapon. That's enough, Reed. You need to leave. I have rights. That's my son. Your rights ended when you abandoned her. And after these broadsheets, no judge in the territory will rule in your favor. You're finished here. Reed's face twisted with rage. For a moment, Kiona thought he might actually attack. But then he looked around, at Holloway's hand on his gun, at Daniel's cold eyes, at Clara standing in the doorway with a shotgun, at the faces of other townspeople who'd gathered outside. Drawn by the shouting, he had no allies left, no leverage. The story had spread too far, too fast. "This isn't over," he said, his voice shaking. "Yes, it is," Kiona replied. "Go back to your life, Reed. Forget we exist. Because if you come near my son again, I won't need a court. I'll handle it myself." Her hand rested on the Colt's grip. The message was clear. Reed left Redemption the next morning, his hired guns trailing behind him. The town watched him go in silence. Some few might have still believed his version of events, but they kept it to themselves. The threat had passed, but standing on the boarding house porch, watching the dust from Reed's departure settle, Kiona knew this was only a temporary victory. Men like him didn't accept defeat easily. He'd be back, or he'd send someone else. The legal battle might be won, but the war was far from over. She looked down at Kai, sleeping peacefully in her arms. He was safe for now, and she would keep him safe no matter what came next, whatever it took. Winter came hard to Redemption. Snow fell in thick curtains, transforming the dusty streets into white silence. The boarding house became a refuge against the cold, its stove burning day and night, windows frosted at the edges. Kiona had almost allowed herself to believe the danger had passed. Almost. It was Clara who first sensed something wrong. She woke Kiona before dawn on a Tuesday morning, her hand gentle on her shoulder, but her face tight with concern. "Someone's been watching the house," Clara whispered. "Saw tracks in the snow this morning, fresh ones leading from the alley behind the stable. Someone's been standing there for hours." Kiona was up immediately, Kai secured in his sling. She moved to the window, careful to stay hidden behind the curtain. The alley was dark, but she could make out the disturbed snow, the impression of boots where someone had stood for a long time. Watching, waiting. "Could be Reed's men," Daniel said from the doorway. He'd taken to sleeping in the front room of the boarding house most nights, claiming he preferred Clara's cooking to the saloons. Nobody questioned it. "I thought he left." Kiona's hand moved to the Colt at her hip. A habit now, as natural as breathing. "He did. Doesn't mean he can't send others back." Sheriff Holloway confirmed their suspicions an hour later. He'd received word from a contact in Santa Fe. Reed had been seen in a saloon there, drunk and angry, offering significant money to anyone willing to retrieve his stolen property. 3 men had taken the job, not the original hired guns who'd left with Reed, but worse. Professional bounty hunters with no scruples and a reputation for getting results regardless of method. They call themselves the Garrett brothers, Holloway explained, his breath fogging in the cold morning air. And not actually brothers, but they've worked together for years. Clay Garrett's the leader, smart, methodical, patient. His partner Silas Moore, quick with a gun and mean with it. The third one's called Knife Pete, and I'll let you imagine how he earned that name. "How long have they been in town?" Daniel asked. "Can't be sure. Could have arrived last night. Could have been here longer, watching and planning. Men like that don't rush." Kiona felt the familiar knot of fear in her stomach, but she pushed it down. Fear was useless now. "What do they want exactly? To take Kai?" "Reed's paying them to bring the baby back to him, one way or another." Whether you come along?" Holloway paused. "I doubt they care much about that detail. They'll have to kill me first. That's what I'm afraid of." Holloway adjusted his gun belt. "I'm deputizing Daniel and putting extra men on patrol. We'll keep watch on the boarding house. Make sure." The window exploded inward. Glass shattered across the floor as something heavy crashed through. Not a bullet, but a rock wrapped in paper. Everyone dove for cover. Daniel pulling his revolver, Holloway moving toward the broken window. Kiona clutched Kai close, checking him frantically for injuries. He was crying but unhurt. Daniel retrieved the rock, unwrapped the paper. His face darkened as he read. "What does it say?" Clara demanded. "Leave the baby on the back porch by midnight. Walk away, nobody gets hurt. Fight, and we burn the whole place down with everyone in it." Silence filled the room, broken only by Kai's crying and the wind whistling through the broken window. "They're trying to intimidate us," Holloway said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Men who threw rocks through windows weren't bluffing. We need to move Kiona and the baby somewhere safer," Clara said. "Somewhere these men won't expect." "Where?" Daniel asked. "Anywhere in town they'll find them." These are hunters. It's what they do. Then we don't stay in town. Kiona's voice was steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through her. We go out. Make them come to us on the ground we choose. That's crazy, Holloway said. You've got a 3-month-old baby. You can't take him out in winter. I was cast out in worse conditions, and we both survived. I can do it again. She looked at Daniel. The line shack where he was born. Do you remember how to find it? In a snowstorm. That's suicide. No. Staying here while they burn the house down or pick us off in the street, that's suicide. Out there it's just them and us. No innocent people caught in between. Daniel and Holloway exchanged looks. Finally, Daniel nodded. It's defensible. One entrance, good sight lines, walls are thick enough to stop bullets. If we can get there before they realize we've gone. They're watching us right now, Holloway interrupted. How do you plan to leave without them seeing? The tunnel, Clara said suddenly. Everyone turned to her. The old smuggler's tunnel from Prohibition days. Runs from the cellar under the boarding house to the livery stable 2 blocks over. I used it for storage, but it's still passable. I didn't know about any tunnel, Holloway said. That's because I never told you. Some things a woman keeps private. Clara was already moving toward the cellar door. Come on, we don't have much time. They worked quickly. Rebecca packed supplies, blankets, dried food, medical supplies, everything that could fit in saddlebags. Clara retrieved weapons from a locked cabinet, a shotgun, boxes of ammunition, a rifle that looked older than the town itself. Daniel went to prepare horses, using the tunnel Clara had mentioned. Kiona changed into heavier clothes, wrapped Kai in every warm layer they could spare. The baby had stopped crying, sensing perhaps the urgency in the air. She checked the Colt one more time, loaded, ready. You don't have to do this, Rebecca said quietly as Kiona prepared to descend into the cellar. We could fight them here together and risk everyone else. You Clara the other boarders? No. Kiona touched Rebecca's arm briefly. Thank you. For everything. For treating me like I was worth teaching. You are worth teaching. Come back safely. The tunnel was dark, cramped, and smelled of earth and old wood. Clara led the way with a lantern, Kiona following close behind, with Kai pressed against her chest. The passage seemed to go on forever, narrow walls pressing in from both sides. Once the ceiling sagged low enough that Kiona had to crouch and shuffle forward. Kai whimpered once, but didn't cry. They emerged in the livery stable, where Daniel had 3 horses ready, his paint, a sturdy bay for Kiona, and a pack horse loaded with supplies. The stable owner, an old man named Hutchins, nodded grimly, heard what's happening. I'll tell anyone who asks that I ain't seen you. Can't promise they'll believe me, but I'll try. Thank you, Kiona said. They rode out through the stable's back entrance just as dawn was breaking. The snow had stopped, leaving everything crystalline and silent. Their breath clouded in the freezing air. Kiona rode with Kai bundled against her, feeling the horse's warmth rising up. Keeping them both from freezing, Daniel led them west then south, making a wide circle around town before turning toward the line shack. He was covering their tracks as best he could, using rocky ground where possible, doubling back occasionally to confuse any pursuit. It would only buy them time, but time was all they needed. They reached the shack by mid-afternoon. It looked exactly as Kiona remembered. Half-collapsed roof, stone walls weathered but solid. The place where Kai had been born. There was a symmetry to it that felt almost inevitable. Daniel immediately began fortifying their position. He cleared snow from around the building to eliminate cover for attackers. Positioned the horses in the partial shelter of the collapsed section where they'd be protected from gunfire. Set up firing positions at the windows and door. Stacked extra ammunition within easy reach. Kiona built a small fire in the old stone hearth, just enough to take the edge off the cold without producing smoke that could be seen for miles. She fed Kai, changed him, sang to him softly in Apache, old songs her mother had sung to her. Songs about survival, about endurance, about the strength of women who refuse to break. They'll come tonight, Daniel said, checking his rifle for the 3rd time. They'll track us here, scout the position, then attack after dark when they have the advantage. How many do you think will come? All 3. Men like that don't split up when there's money involved. They'll want to be sure of the outcome. 3 against 2. And I have to protect Kai while fighting. I know. Daniel set the rifle aside, looked at her directly. Kiona, if things go wrong, if I go down, you need to run. Take Kai and go. Don't try to fight them alone. I won't run. Kiona, I said I won't run. Not anymore. Not ever again. She met his eyes. If they want my son, they'll have to kill me. And I won't make it easy. Daniel held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded. All right then, we fight together. Till the end, they waited as the sun tracked across the sky and began its descent. Long shadows stretched across the snow. The temperature dropped sharply. Kiona wrapped Kai in every blanket they had, creating a nest for him in the corner farthest from the door, protected by stone walls on 3 sides. He slept peacefully, unaware of the violence coming. The attack came just after full dark. No warning shot. No challenge. Just sudden gunfire erupting from 3 different positions around the shack, bullets slamming into stone and wood. Kiona dropped flat, covering Kai with her body. Daniel returned fire immediately, his rifle barking in the enclosed space. North window and the tree line east. Daniel shouted over the gunfire. Can't see the third. Kiona crawled to the southern window, the Colt in her hand. She could see muzzle flashes in the darkness, maybe 40 yards out. She fired twice, aiming for the flashes. A man's voice cursed, not a death cry, but pain. She'd hit something. The gunfire intensified. Bullets tore through the remaining roof section, showering them with splinters and dust. One shot came through the window inches from Kiona's head, close enough that she felt the shock wave. She fired back, reloaded, fired again. They're trying to pin us down. Daniel called. Classic suppression tactic. One of them is moving. Something crashed against the door, once, twice. The old wood held, but barely. Daniel swung his rifle toward it just as the door burst inward. A man charged through, huge, bearded, with a knife in each hand. Knife Pete, presumably. Daniel fired. The shot took Pete in the shoulder, spinning him but not dropping him. Pete lunged forward with terrifying speed, one knife slashing toward Daniel's throat. Daniel blocked with the rifle, but Pete's momentum drove them both backward into the wall. Kiona turned her gun toward them, but couldn't get a clear shot. They were too close, moving too fast. Pete brought his knife down in a vicious arc. Daniel caught his wrist, and they grappled, straining against each other. A bullet from outside shattered the window near Kiona. She dropped back, returned fire blind. When she looked again, Daniel had gotten a hand on Pete's knife wrist, was forcing it back. But Pete had his other knife rising toward Daniel's ribs. Kiona fired. The bullet hit Pete in the side of the head. He dropped like a stone, his knives clattering across the floor. Daniel shoved the body aside, breathing hard. Thanks, even now. More gunfire from outside, but different, moving, circling. The other 2 were repositioning, looking for better angles. Kiona could hear them calling to each other, coordinating. They're going to rush us, Daniel said, reloading quickly, both at once from different sides. We can't cover all the angles. Then we make them come from one direction. Kiona grabbed one of the oil lamps, wrapped a cloth around it. Can you hit that dead tree 20 yards north? Daniel understood immediately. He fired 3 quick shots, the last one hitting the lamp Kiona had placed near the tree. Glass shattered, oil spread, and within seconds flames were climbing up the dead wood. The fire illuminated the area, destroying the attacker's cover. A figure broke from the tree line, running east toward better darkness. Kiona tracked him with the Colt, led him slightly, fired. The man stumbled but kept running. She fired again. This time he went down and didn't get up. One left, Daniel said. The final attacker, Clay Garrett, the smart one, the careful one, didn't rush, didn't expose himself. Instead, his voice called out from the darkness, "You killed my men." That wasn't smart. Now this gets personal. It was always personal, Kiona shouted back. You came for my child. What did you expect? Expected you'd be reasonable. Reed's offering good money. We could have done this clean. Now it's going to be ugly. Then come finish it. Silence. The fire burned lower, shadows deepening. Minutes passed. Kiona's heart was hammered. Where was he? What was he planning? The answer came from an unexpected direction. Smoke. Garrett had circled around to the collapsed section of roof where the horses were sheltered. He'd set fire to the dry wood there, and now smoke was pouring into the shack through every gap and crack. Within minutes, the interior was filling with thick, choking smoke. Kai started crying, his small lungs irritated by the fumes. Kiona grabbed him, pressing his face against her chest, trying to filter the smoke with her clothing. But they couldn't stay. The smoke was getting thicker, the heat building. They'd suffocate if they didn't move. "We have to go out," Daniel said, coughing. "It's what he wants, but we don't have a choice. Together. Front door. Fast." They moved to the door, Daniel first with the rifle, Kiona right behind with Kai clutched in one arm and the Colt in her other hand. Daniel kicked the door open and they burst out into the night. Garrett was waiting. His rifle came up, aimed at Daniel. But Daniel had anticipated it, was already diving left. Garrett's shot went high. Daniel rolled, came up firing. Garrett ducked behind the horse trough, returned fire. Kiona ran right away from the shootout, trying to draw Garrett's attention from Daniel. It worked. Garrett shifted his aim toward Kai. She saw his finger tighten on the trigger. 2 shots rang out simultaneously. Garrett's bullet tore through the air where Kiona's head had been an instant before. She dropped to a crouch. At the last second, pure instinct. Her bullet hit Garrett's center mass. He staggered, looked down at the spreading blood on his chest with something like surprise. Daniel's second shot hit Garrett in the throat. He went down hard, his rifle falling into the snow. Silence descended, broken only by Kai's crying, the crackle of flames from the shack, and the hard breathing of 2 people who'd just survived the impossible. Kiona checked Kai frantically. No injuries, just scared and cold. She held him close, whispering reassurance, checking Daniel with her eyes. He was standing whole, looking at the 3 bodies scattered around the clearing. "It's done," he said quietly, but something in Kiona's gut said it wasn't. Garrett had been the careful one, the planner. Would he really have positioned himself so vulnerably? Would he really have movement? Behind Daniel, a 4th figure rising from behind the pack horse, gun raised. "Daniel!" Kiona screamed. Daniel turned, but too slow. The figure fired. Daniel went down. Kiona fired on pure instinct, every lesson Daniel had taught her compressed into a single moment. "Lead the target!" "Center mass. Squeeze, don't pull." The Colt bucked in her hand once, twice, 3 times. The figure, a man she didn't recognize, probably a 4th member of the gang they hadn't known about, dropped his gun and fell backward into the snow. Kiona ran to Daniel. He was conscious, clutching his side where blood seeped through his fingers. The bullet had hit low, maybe missing vital organs, but definitely causing damage. How bad? She asked, already pressing her hand over his to apply pressure. Bad enough. His face was pale, jaw tight with pain. But not fatal. Not if we can stop the bleeding. She worked quickly, tearing strips from her shirt to make bandages, packing the wound as tightly as she dared. Daniel gritted his teeth but didn't cry out. When she'd done all she could, she sat back assessing. "Can you ride?" "If I have to, you have to. We need to get you back to Doc Pritchard." "What about them?" He gestured weakly at the bodies. "Sheriff Holloway can deal with them. Our priority is keeping you alive." She got him onto his horse through sheer determination and his own stubborn refusal to die in the snow. Kai went back into the sling against her chest. They rode through the night, Kiona leading Daniel's horse, following the stars north toward redemption. Dawn was breaking when they finally saw the town's lights ahead. Daniel was barely conscious, swaying in the saddle. Kiona's arms ached from holding Kai for hours. But they were alive. They'd survived. As they rode down Main Street, people emerged from buildings staring. Sheriff Holloway ran toward them, Clara right behind. Hands reached up to help Daniel down, to steady Kiona, to take her to safety. "Doc Pritchard!" Holloway shouted. "Someone get the doc!" But Kiona barely heard. She was looking at Daniel being carried toward the doctor's office, watching his blood drip into the snow, and realizing with absolute clarity that this man had nearly died protecting her, had stood between her and death without hesitation. That meant something. something she wasn't ready to name, but could no longer deny. In her arms, Kai had stopped crying. He looked up at her with wide, dark eyes, and she saw her own strength reflected there. They had faced the worst and survived. They had fought for their right to exist and won. The battle was over. Reed's hired killers were dead. The threat was ended. But as the sun rose over redemption, painting the snow in shades of gold and crimson, Kiona understood that the real victory wasn't in the violence or the deaths. It was still here, still standing, still fighting, still alive. Doc Pritchard worked on Daniel for 3 hours. Kiona sat outside the surgery room, Kai sleeping fitfully in her arms, listening to the muffled sounds of instruments clinking and Pritchard's gruff voice issuing commands to Clara, who'd volunteered as his assistant. Every minute stretched like hours. Every silence felt like death approaching. When Pritchard finally emerged, his hands were scrubbed clean, but his shirt was spotted with blood. He looked exhausted, older than his years, but his eyes were clear. "He'll live," Pritchard said simply. "Bullet went through clean, missed the kidney by less than an inch. He lost blood, and there's infection risk, but if he follows orders and rests, he should be fine in a month or so." Kiona felt something inside her chest unclench. "Can I see him?" "He's sleeping." Gave him laudanum for the pain. "But you can sit with him if you keep quiet." The room smelled of carbolic acid and copper. Daniel lay on the examination table, his torso wrapped in fresh bandages, his face pale against the white pillow. But his chest rose and fell steadily, and when Kiona touched his hand, she felt warmth there, life. She sat in the chair beside him, Kai cradled against her, and for the first time in days, allowed herself to simply breathe. Clara appeared in the doorway with hot coffee and bread. "You need to eat and sleep. When's the last time you did either?" "I don't remember." "That's what I thought." Clara set the food on the small table beside the chair. "Eat. I'll watch the baby while you rest." "I can't." "You can and you will. You've been fighting for days. Even warriors need to rest." Clara's voice softened. "He's safe now. You're safe. Let someone else keep watch for a few hours." Kiona wanted to argue, but exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. She ate mechanically, barely tasting the food, then surrendered Kai to Clara's experienced hands and closed her eyes. Sleep claimed her immediately, deep and dreamless. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of voices. Daniel was awake, propped up slightly, talking to Sheriff Holloway. When he saw Kiona stir, his face softened. "Morning," he said, his voice rough but steady. "How do you feel?" "Like I got shot. But alive, thanks to you." He shifted carefully, wincing. "Holloway's been filling me in. Reed heard about what happened to his hired men. He's filed complaints with the territorial government, claiming we murdered innocent bounty hunters operating within their legal rights." Legal rights to kidnap a child. Kiona's voice was sharp. "He's claiming he had documentation proving paternity and custodial authority. Says we were the aggressors." Holloway leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "It's all lies, but he's got lawyers and money. Could make things complicated. Let him try." Kiona stood, moving to the window. The street outside was busy with morning activity. Normal life continuing. "I'm not afraid of his lawyers anymore. The whole territory knows what he did. No court will rule in his favor. Maybe not. But he could drag this out for years, make your life miserable with legal challenges and harassment." Holloway paused. "Unless we end it permanently." Kiona turned to face him. "What are you suggesting?" "Reed's in Santa Fe. If someone were to ride there and have a very direct conversation with him, make it clear that any further action against you would have immediate and unpleasant consequences. Well, men like Reed understand direct language better than legal proceedings. You're talking about threatening him. I'm talking about making him understand that his money and lawyers won't protect him if he keeps pushing. That some people in this territory have very long memories and very short patience for men who hurt women and children." Daniel spoke up from the bed. "I'll go. Once Pritchard clears me to ride." "You'll do no such thing," Pritchard called from the other room. You'll be lucky if you can walk across a room in 2 weeks, let alone ride to Santa Fe." "Then I'll go," Kiona said. Everyone turned to stare at her. She met their gazes steadily. "He needs to hear it from me. Needs to understand that I'm not the same woman he left in the desert. That I'm not afraid of him anymore. That if he ever comes near my son again, I won't need hired guns or lawyers. I'll handle it myself." "Kiona," Daniel started. "No, this is mine to finish. He started this when he rode into my life with his lies. I'm ending it on my terms." Holloway studied her for a long moment. "You'd need someone to ride with you, for appearance if nothing else. And you've got a baby to think about. Clara can watch Kai for a few days. And Rebecca's offered before to help. As for someone to ride with me," she looked at Holloway. "You're the law. Seems like you'd be the appropriate escort." A slow smile crossed Holloway's face. "I suppose I do have some territorial business in Santa Fe. Might as well ride together. Safety in numbers and all that." They left 3 days later, early in the morning when the sun was just painting the eastern sky orange and gold. Kai cried when Kiona handed him to Clara, but she steeled herself against it. This was necessary. Reed needed to understand, with absolute clarity, that his chapter in their lives was permanently closed. The ride to Santa Fe took 2 days through cold but clear weather. Holloway proved to be good company, quiet when silence was needed, conversational when the miles stretched long. He told stories about his time as a Union officer, about the war that had shaped his understanding of justice and cruelty. Kiona told him about growing up Apache, about learning to track and hunt, about the moment she'd realized her tribe would never accept her pregnancy. "You've traveled a long road," Holloway said as they made camp the first night. "Longer than most people manage in a lifetime." "I didn't have a choice. There's always a choice. You could have given up. Let the desert take you, or let Reed intimidate you, or let the town's prejudice break you. But you fought instead. That's not circumstance. That's character." They reached Santa Fe at midday on the 3rd day. The city was larger than Redemption by an order of magnitude. Real streets, multi-story buildings, a proper plaza with a church and government offices. People moved with the busy purposefulness of city dwellers, barely glancing at the 2 riders. Holloway had contacts in the territorial marshal's office. Within an hour, they had Reed's location, a hotel near the plaza, expensive and respectable. He'd taken a suite on the 2nd floor and had been seen entertaining lawyers and business associates, wants everyone to think he's an upstanding citizen wronged by savages. Holloway said grimly, "Let's go remind him of the truth." They walked into the hotel lobby like they owned it. The clerk started to object to Kiona's presence, Apache woman clearly not a guest, but Holloway's badge and cold stare silenced him. They climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor, found room 204, and knocked. The door opened. Reed stood there, dressed in an expensive suit, looking like he'd just returned from a business lunch. His expression cycled through surprise, fear, and then carefully constructed indignation. "Sheriff Holloway." "Miss Kiona, this is unexpected." His voice was controlled, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "If you've come to apologize for the murder of my hired men, we've come to deliver a message," Holloway interrupted. "Mind if we come in?" Reed hesitated, then stepped back. The suite was lavish, thick carpets, upholstered furniture, a view of the plaza. A desk in the corner was covered with legal documents, evidence of his attempts to use the system against her. Kiona walked to that desk, picked up the top document, a petition to the territorial governor requesting an investigation into vigilante violence against lawful bounty hunters. She read it slowly, then set it down. "You want to talk about murder?" she said quietly. "Let's talk about how you seduced me with promises you never intended to keep. How you left me pregnant and alone. How you rode away, knowing I'd be cast out by my people. How you abandoned me in the desert to die. That's not murder by law, maybe, but it's murder by intent. I had business, you had convenience. I was inconvenient, so you discarded me like trash." Her voice remained calm, but steel ran through every word. "Then when you learned I survived, when you learned I'd built a life without you, your pride couldn't handle it. So you sent men with guns to take my child. Men who tried to kill me, who tried to kill Daniel Brennan, who would have burned innocent people alive to complete their job. 4 men are dead because of you, Reed. 4 men whose blood is on your hands. They were operating legally. They were kidnappers and murderers. Holloway stepped forward. And here's what's going to happen now. You're going to withdraw every legal complaint, every petition, every challenge you filed. You're going to put in writing that you have no claim to the child. You're going to disappear from Keona's life permanently. And if you ever, and I mean ever, contact her again, make threats, send men, or even speak her name in public, I will personally ensure that every newspaper in the territory knows the full truth about Thomas Reed. Not the version you've been selling, but the real truth. The abandoned pregnant woman, the hired killers, all of it. Reed's face had gone pale. You can't threaten me. I have rights, so does she. Holloway's voice dropped to something cold and final. And I'm done watching men like you hide behind laws you don't respect to hurt people who can't fight back. So here's your choice. Sign the papers I'm going to have drawn up renouncing all claims. Leave New Mexico territory and don't come back. Or I start talking, and I don't stop until your name is poison from here to California. Reed looked between them, at Holloway's implacable expression, at Keona's unwavering gaze. The calculation was visible on his face. His reputation was already damaged. Fighting would only make it worse. And he'd already lost the thing he'd wanted most, control. Fine, he said finally. I'll sign your papers. I'll leave. But you should know, both of you, that I could have given that child a good life, education, opportunity, things she never could provide. Keona stepped closer to him, close enough that he took an involuntary step back. My son doesn't need your opportunities. He needs to grow up knowing his mother fought for him, protected him, loved him enough to face down men with guns. That's worth more than all your money and education combined. He'll grow up free, Reed, free of you and everything you represent. And that's the best gift I could ever give him. She turned and walked out, Holloway following. Behind them, they heard Reed's door close, the lock clicking with finality. They stayed in Santa Fe long enough to have the documents drawn up by a territorial lawyer. Reed signed them the next morning, his hand shaking slightly, his face carefully blank. The papers were notarized and filed with the territorial court, legal and binding. Thomas Reed officially renounced all paternal claims to Kai in perpetuity. Keona and Holloway rode back to redemption in companionable silence. The weather held, and they made good time. As they approached the town, on the afternoon of the second day, Keona felt something shift in her chest. This was home now. Not the Apache lands where she'd been born, not the life she'd expected to live, but something new, something she'd built herself. Clara met them at the boarding house, Kai in her arms. He'd grown even in just 5 days, more alert, more responsive. When Keona took him, he looked at her and made a sound that wasn't quite words, but was definitely recognition. Her son knew her. Daniel was up and moving, though slowly and with obvious discomfort. When he saw her, relief washed over his face. "It's done," he asked. "It's done. Reed signed away all rights. He's leaving the territory." "Good." Daniel lowered himself carefully into a chair. "Then it's really over." "Yes, it's over." But even as she said it, Keona knew that wasn't quite right. The threat was over. The danger had passed. But something else was beginning. The weeks that followed were quiet, and in that quiet, Keona discovered what peace actually felt like. Not the absence of danger, but the presence of belonging. She returned to her work at the boarding house, but now people greeted her on the street. Not everyone. Prejudice died hard in small towns, but enough. Enough that she could walk to the general store without hostile stares. Enough that children waved at Kai instead of pointing and whispering. Rebecca continued her reading lessons, and Keona progressed from primers to actual books. She discovered a love of poetry, though she kept that private. The words moved her in ways she didn't quite understand, but didn't need to. They simply did. Daniel healed slowly but steadily. By Christmas, he was back to full strength, and by the new year, he'd taken a job as deputy sheriff under Holloway. The position suited him, enforcing fairness, protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. He still came by the boarding house most evenings, still sat on the back porch talking with Kiona while Kai played with wooden blocks Clara had made. One evening in early spring, as the snow melted and the first green shoots appeared in the mud, Daniel asked the question that had been building between them for months. What are you going to do now? Long term, I mean. Stay here? Move somewhere else? You've got options now. You're not trapped. Kiona looked out at the land stretching beyond redemption, vast and open, full of possibility. I think I'll stay. Kai needs stability. And this place, it's not perfect, but it's ours. We built something here. We did. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Kiona, I need to tell you something. These past months, getting to know you, watching you become who you are. He paused, choosing words carefully. I'm in love with you. Have been for a while now. And I know the timing might not be right, and I know you've been through hell, and I'm not expecting anything in return. But I needed you to know. Kiona's heart was pounding. She'd known, on some level, but hearing him say it made it real, made it something that demanded a response. I'm not the woman you saved in the desert anymore, she said slowly. I know. You're stronger now, harder in some ways, but also more yourself. I'm Apache. You're white. People will talk. Let them talk. Kai isn't your son. He could be. If you wanted, I'd raise him as mine. Give him my name. Teach him everything I know. Daniel turned to face her fully. I'm not asking for an answer right now. I'm just asking you to think about it. About a future where you're not fighting alone anymore. Where we build something together. She looked at him. This man who'd found her dying and chosen to save her. Who'd taught her to shoot and read and stand tall. Who'd taken a bullet protecting her son. Who'd never asked for anything in return, but had given everything. I'll think about it, she said. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Kiona stood in her small room, with Kai sleeping peacefully in his crib. She looked at the life she'd built, modest but real. She thought about Daniel's words, about the possibility of a future she'd never imagined. She thought about the girl she'd been, believing Thomas Reed's lies, trusting that love meant anything beyond words. That girl had died in the desert. The woman who'd taken her place was different, tempered by fire, shaped by survival, defined by her own choices rather than others' judgments. The woman she'd become didn't need Daniel Brennan, didn't need anyone really. She'd proven she could survive alone, could fight alone, could raise her son alone, but wanting wasn't the same as needing, and maybe, just maybe, she wanted to see what they could build together. Spring turned to summer. The boarding house remained busy. Sheriff Holloway hired 2 more deputies as the town grew. Rebecca got engaged to a rancher from the next county over. Clara's daughters visited from back east, and the house filled with laughter. Daniel courted Kiona properly, the way people did when the whole town was watching. Flowers left on the porch. Walks after dinner. Sunday rides out to see the land. Slow and careful, building something solid. In August, on a day when the sky was impossibly blue and the wind carried the scent of sage, Daniel asked her formally. Not just about marriage, but about partnership. About raising Kai together. About building a life that would belong to both of them. Kiona said yes. The wedding was small, held in the boarding house parlor because no church would have them. Sheriff Holloway officiated, using his authority as a territorial officer. Clara wept openly. Rebecca played piano. Kai, now 1-year-old and walking unsteadily, laughed through the entire ceremony. When it was done, when they were legally and publicly bound together, Daniel kissed her gently and whispered, "Thank you." For what? For surviving, for fighting, for being who you are, for choosing this. That night, lying beside her husband, the words still felt strange, with her son sleeping in the next room, and the sound of celebration still echoing from downstairs. Kiona finally allowed herself to believe it. She was safe. She was loved. She was home. The woman who'd been pushed into the desert to die had crawled her way back to life and built something better than anything that had been taken from her. She'd been called shameful, called savage, called unworthy, but she'd proven them all wrong. She wasn't what had been done to her. She wasn't the judgment of her tribe, or the cruelty of Thomas Reed, or the prejudice of strangers. She was Kiona Brennan now, mother, wife, survivor, warrior, and she was free. In the years that followed, the story would be told and retold. The pregnant Apache woman cast out by her tribe, the cowboy who found her dying in the desert, the battle against hired killers, the confrontation with the man who'd abandoned her, the marriage that united two people from different worlds. Some versions were more accurate than others, but all of them ended the same way, with a woman who refused to die, standing tall under an open sky, her son in her arms, her future stretched out before her like the endless plains. And in every version, in every telling, the message was clear. Survival isn't about what happens to you. It's about what you do with what remains. Kiona had taken what remained and built an empire from it. Not an empire of wealth or power, but something more valuable. An empire of dignity, of choice, of absolute unshakable freedom, and that more than anything else was worth fighting for. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.